With us now on the KLBJ Live Line is Jody Ferguson of Austin, an international affairs expert. He's a former senior advisor in the Department of Defense during the terms of George W. Bush and Barack Obama.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ferguson. How you doing, sir?
Hello, I'm doing well. How are you three doing?
Hey, we're doing great. We're just about 2 months into this war in Ukraine. How do you characterize the state of that war to this point?
It appears that we've reached a plateau wherein the first Russian attempts to overwhelm the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian government failed. And it looks like that they had moved and concentrated their forces in the eastern part of the country, and they're preparing and starting slowly to mount an offensive, hoping to cut off the main forces of the Ukrainian army in a pincer movement, a classic pincer movement in the eastern portion of the country. So it appears we've reached phase 2 of the war.
Right now, will Ukraine hold on to all their land, or can you see a future when the Russians take over parts of Ukraine that they are now heavily involved in? How do you see this ending, and do you see it ending in a good way for Ukraine?
Ed, it could go either way. What's really been amazing and astounding for the entire world is to see the extent and the passion and the tenacity of the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian armed forces. Nobody would have predicted 9 weeks in that we had generally reached a stalemate. However, don't rule out the ability of the Russians to regroup their forces and begin pounding away and come to a situation wherein they are basically unable to be moved away out of Ukrainian territory. I think that regaining Crimea would be the toughest thing right now for Ukraine. However, the eastern provinces are still up in the air. Should the conflict, though, come to negotiations and end with a peace treaty, there's a good chance that Russia will end up with control of Crimea, and that the two eastern provinces in dispute would have some sort of autonomy from Ukraine. However, again, I don't rule out scenarios wherein either Ukraine or Russia ends up with a more total victory at this stage. Next few weeks are going to really be telling on what's going to unfold.
Mr. Ferguson, today we're seeing a lot of the headlines about Putin warning that he will use nukes against the West. Lightning-fast strikes if anyone interferes in Ukraine. How should we take those threats? Just as him... Initially,
I viewed the whole situation before the Russians invaded as a lot of bluster. So I was wrong on that score. They ended up invading. So I've been very, very careful to see what the Russians are saying, because for the most part, what they've been saying, they've ended up doing. So that is something that's of great concern to me. I do think, however, Melynda, before they would go down the road of nuclear weapons, I would expect to see something more in the realm of chemical or biological weapons, which, as you know, are much more tactical and more local. Mm-hmm. I think beyond that, as I alluded to before in speaking with you all, massive cyber attacks, although it appears we've been able to defend against those fairly well. I still think that nukes are something of the last resort, but something that does concern me is when the Russian leadership starts talking about instability in their own country and the attempt by NATO and the West, i.e. the United States in their minds, to throw their government over and throw the regime over. So it's not something I take lightly at all. Some people think it's bluster. I'm not willing to say that yet.
Secretary Austin, after his visit to Ukraine, indicated a goal of the U.S. is to make sure the Russian military is never able to carry out another invasion in the future. What did he mean by that? What was the significance of that statement?
I think if what a lot of his advisors around him and certainly I heard one top State Department official say this, that they would have advised him not to say something like that because it goes to the core of what I was just talking about. The Russians see this now as an attempt to weaken their own government, perhaps throw it over. However, what he's alluding to is, in fact, happening now. A large percentage of the Russian fighting force has been degraded. As we know, they lost dozens of armored vehicles. They've lost airplanes. And as we know, they lost their flagship, a huge cruiser in this Black Sea, the Moskva, a couple of weeks ago. So what he was referring to is, in fact, happening. If the war keeps going on, if it becomes a grinding war of attrition, and we look at months, years ahead, Ukrainians have demonstrated they're perfectly capable of holding the Russians at bay, and not only that, of inflicting severe and enormous losses on their armed forces. And assuming the Ukrainians are willing to bear the brunt of that, that's something that we could call the Afghan scenario. So I think that's what Secretary Austin was referring to.
Jody Ferguson is with us, former senior advisor in the Department of Defense during the Bush-Obama years. Mr. Ferguson, you have friends in Moscow. You've traveled extensively over there. What are your contacts, the Russian people, the everyday people, thinking about what's going on with their country? And in your opinion, is Vladimir Putin stable right now, or is he not stable?
Do you mean stable in a mental sense or politically?
Both,
no.
But especially mentally.
Or medically.
Or medically,
There's a lot of focus. There's a lot of focus.
I'll answer your second question first. No, I'll start with the first. I've been amazed, shocked, disconcerted at the amount of support that he's been able to maintain in Russia. Yes, we speak every day with people in Russia, and I've been trying to get a sense of what they're being told. For example, I often ask, what are the KIA rates they're hearing? How many Russian soldiers have been killed? What are they being told? We've been told here in the West through various sources, including NATO and Ukraine, that number's around 15,000. In Russia, they're not telling them. The last reported figure was 1,300. So his popularity rate, or the polling for him, his support rate has been extremely high. Again, information is difficult for most Russians to come to. The Russians that live in the big cities, obviously, that have friends in the West, that work with Western multinationals, they're getting information, and a lot of them are leaving. But for the most part, Russia, a vast country with a lot of people who don't have access to the outside world, including a lot of the conscripts, by the way, that are fighting in the Ukraine, they're not getting this information. So his support is still strong. Occasionally you hear rumblings about unhappiness in the Kremlin among the security forces, among the military, but I've not seen anything to indicate to me that he is under any political threat. However, should reverses continue on the battlefield, that could change. Mentally, I just read a long report today by a foreign service officer, retired foreign service officer, who knows Putin quite well. He doesn't think Putin has reached the edge of stability in terms of his mental capacity. So I'm hopeful on that score. However, that doesn't mean that he's not doing rash things, and we've seen from the beginning he's done a lot of rash things.
Well, what about this report that they're kind of showing video that's been around today? I've seen notes that perhaps Parkinson's disease, and then also that Putin's kind of stayed out of public view. Does that in any way have any of the Russian people thinking, okay, he's not being seen very much, there's this video, and they may not be able to even see the video of this circulation? Does the medical part of, if he is going through something health-wise, play into any of this?
As far as I can tell, nobody in Russia has really any inside information. In other words, I've not heard anything, and we monitor Russian news. We monitor the press. There have been no indications at all. There was, however, I saw on Twitter actually one Russian person who tweets a lot was pointing out the fact that during the meeting with his Minister of Defense, who had disappeared and reappeared recently, that Putin was grabbing the edge of the desk and didn't let go for 15 minutes. So I wish I had something interesting and some insight to give to you on that score, but I really don't, and I certainly don't think that it's something that occupies the thoughts of most of the people on the ground in Russia.
Jody Ferguson, thank you for being with us again on Mark, Melynda, and Ed on KLBJ Radio. We look forward to our next visit.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon. Thanks so much.